Chapter 1 of the Night, Sonata. 2022, Autumn. Drizzling rain falls from the gray sky in Zhejiang. The light rain drifts down onto the city streets. It's autumn. Occasionally, you can still see pedestrians without umbrellas. They hurriedly pass by, using their hands to shield their heads. In the narrow alley, there is a 17 or 18-year-old teenager sitting across from an old man under the canopy next to the supermarket's convenience store. The world outside the canopy is gloomy, with the ground soaked into a light black color by the rain. Only the area under the canopy remains dry, as if the whole world has left only this piece of clean land. In front of them is a worn-out wooden Chinese chessboard. Above their heads is a red, Happy Grocery sign. "General," young Frank said before standing up. An old man with sparse hair sat there, motionless. Young Frank glanced at the other person calmly and said, "There's no need to struggle. I can still go on," the old man said unwillingly. "I only lost after 13 steps." In his words, the old man felt a bit embarrassed about losing after 13 steps. Frank didn't say anything. The danger on the chessboard was already apparent. It was the last moment when the endgame was in sight. The young man had a clean face and clear eyes, just sitting there in simple school uniform. It's like purifying the world around you, making it a bit more transparent. The old man threw the chess piece he was holding onto the chessboard. He resigned by abandoning a piece. Frank walked into the nearby supermarket counter, as if he owned the place. He took 20 yuan from the change basket under the counter and put it in his pocket. The old man mumbled and grumbled, looking at Frank. "I have to lose 20 yuan to you every day. Just this morning, I won 20 yuan from someone else. Now, it's all lost to you." Frank pocketed the money. Then he sat back next to the chessboard and began to replay. They no longer wanted to play chess with me. I don't have to make money through you. You need face, I need money. This is fair and reasonable. "You got me all figured out, huh?" grumbled the old man. "The fortune teller said I could live until 78. I'm only 50 now. If I lose $20 to you every day, how much money do I have to spend? But I will also teach you how to win back some face in Chinese chess," Frank replied calmly. "So in the end, you won't lose out." The old man grumbled. "But everything you have taught me these past 2 days has been useless." Frank glanced at him and said, "Don't talk about yourself like that." The old man irritably rearranged the chessboard. Then he eagerly said, Okay. Let's replay." At that moment, Frank suddenly lowered his head. The time that just passed feels like it is being replayed in his mind. The cannon attacking ahead. The pawns on both sides of the Chu River and Han border, echoing in his mind one by one. Not just these. There are also the uncles passing by them while they were playing chess, holding 4 freshly baked buns in his hand. The steam rising from the just out of the oven buns, creating a layer of white mist in the transparent plastic bag. A little girl in a white dress passes by, holding an umbrella. There are 2 beautiful butterflies on the vamp of her little leather shoes. Above the sky, the drifting rain falls in the alley. Crystal clear. At the end of the alley, the Route 103 bus rook flashes past from the narrow alley mouth. A woman in a beige windbreaker is running towards the rook bus stop with an umbrella. Footsteps. The sound of rainwater flowing into the nearby manhole cover. These noisy sounds make the world strangely quiet. Frank has never forgotten all of this, even though it is sometimes difficult to recall. However, difficulty does not mean impossibility. This peculiar memory is a talent that Frank was born with. It's as if he casually extracted a save file from the river of time. And then he read the images stored in that magnetic tape. Frank suppressed the dizziness in his brain. He picked up the chess pieces on the chessboard. The old man fell silent instantly, his eyes fixed on the board. Reviewing each game was also part of the gambling agreement. Frank was in charge of teaching chess. The old man would learn chess after losing money. This scene was somewhat peculiar. Frank did not display the humility and shyness that young people should have when facing elders. Instead, he was like a teacher. Frank moved the pieces step by step. The old man didn't even blink. Everything was a normal opening at first. But he couldn't figure out how he had reached the sixth move. He clearly had taken the opponent's knight, yet suddenly found himself in a losing position. The essence of sacrificing the knight in 13 moves lies in sacrificing the horse by moving the rook in the sixth move. This is a killer move that breaks through the defense. Frank said quietly, "I saw you playing chess with that old man in the park the day before yesterday. He likes to play the perk defense. You can use this 13-move sacrifice horse strategy against him without any problems." The old man on the other side fell into deep thought. Then he asked softly, "Can you really beat him?" "Learn the 13-move sacrifice horse strategy one taught you within a week. You can regain your face," Frank said. After all, his moves weren't that great either. The old man's face showed a hint of joy. But then he suddenly asked, "Can I beat him after studying for a week?" "How long do I need to study chess to beat you?" Under the awning, Frank began to think seriously. "The fortune teller said I will live until 78, but that's too soon." The old man's face froze. "If you say less, I might just live to 79. Huh? You should be in the evening study session now. Why did school get out so early today?" He knew Frank was a high school sophomore. Today is Tuesday, so the number 13 high school 2 streets away should be having their evening self-study session now. Frank thought for a moment and replied, "I'm waiting for someone. Waiting for someone." The old man was taken aback. Frank stood up and looked at the drizzle outside the eaves. His gaze wandered in the rain curtain. The old man said, "Frank, you are so good at chess. Why not participate in a competition? You said you need money. You can win prize money by becoming a champion." Young Frank shook his head. "I just memorized many chess games in my mind. It doesn't mean I'm really good at chess. Memory does not represent analytical ability. I can play against you all, but I get nervous with real masters. My path is not here. Chess is just temporary. All memorized in the mind." The old man sighed. "I used to think that having an extraordinary memory was just something made up by others. But now, at this moment..." The old man suddenly noticed Frank was momentarily stunned. He followed the young man's gaze and looked towards the end of the alley. He happened to see a couple holding hands, with a little boy walking towards them. The middle-aged woman was wearing an exquisite windbreaker. She was carrying a cake box in her hand. The box is tied with a beautiful purple satin ribbon. The gloomy world couldn't dampen the joyful expressions on the three people. Frank turned around and left. He left, leaving the old man sitting under the canopy at the entrance of the grocery store, sighing softly. The middle-aged woman saw Frank's figure and called out his name. But Frank, without looking back, disappeared at the other end of the alley. The walls on both sides of the alley were very old, with white paint peeling off, revealing patches of weathered red bricks. The person Frank was waiting for arrived, but he didn't feel like waiting anymore. Episode 2, Countdown. A middle-aged woman quickly walked to the entrance of Happy Grocery. She looked at the old man and said, "Uncle Zhang, why is Frank here again to play chess with you? It seems they know each other well from their conversation." Uncle Zhang's tone suddenly became less polite. "He's your own son." "You ask me? He doesn't have any living expenses left. He can only rely on playing chess to earn a little money for food." Middle-aged woman Frances was stunned. "But I give his dad Frank's living expenses every month." Uncle Zhang was also stunned by this statement. "Then I don't know what's going on." Uncle Zhang pondered. Frances is not a poor person either. It looks like Frank's living expenses are not considered to be small. But why is that young man living so frugally? Frank doesn't seem like a spendthrift. He lives each day very meticulously. He never even drinks a drop of beverage. Shouldn't he be attending evening study sessions now? Frances asked. It was then that Uncle Zhang remembered he had mentioned he was waiting for someone. "No, I have to go home and check on something," Frances said. With that, she quickly left with the cake in hand. But suddenly, The man beside her said, "Francis, Jay's birthday is today. We have already booked a place. After eating, we still need to take him to see a movie." Francis turned to look at the man. "Frank might have skipped class. I can't just turn a blind eye, can I? He's already 17 and can take care of himself. Besides, he still has his own father." The man paused and softened his tone after speaking. "Actually, it's okay to visit him on the weekend. Let's accompany Jay today." Francis frowned upon hearing this, but after a few seconds, she let out a sigh and said, "Okay, let's celebrate Jay's birthday today." In the shady path in the residential compound, Frank walked into the dim doorway and ignored the advertisements for locksmith and real estate services plastered on the wall like psoriasis. He took out the key and unlocked the front door on the ground floor. A 76-square-meter house with 2 bedrooms and 1 living room. The lighting in the room on the ground floor is very poor. He took out his phone, opened the contacts. Then he made a call out. "Hello, Dad." The voice on the other end of the phone had already interrupted him. "If you need living expenses, go ask your mom. I don't have money. She has a lot of money now." As he spoke, the sound of playing mahjong could be heard from the other end of the phone. "I don't want money," Frank whispered. "I haven't asked you for money in a long time." "What's going on?" the man asked impatiently. "Are you going to a parent-teacher meeting again? Go find your mom for this kind of thing." Before the other party could finish speaking, Frank hung up the phone this time. He leaned lightly against the closed door, then rolled up the sleeve of his school uniform jacket. He stared blankly at his forearm, where white digits and symbols resembling a liquid crystal display read, "Countdown 5 hours 58 minutes and 13 seconds." The white digits seemed to be embedded like fluorescent tattoos in his flesh and skin, no matter how much he rubbed them. There was no way to erase it. Looking closer, Frank also saw special and intricate patterns within those numbers. It was like mechanical parts interlocking with each other, full of a sense of futuristic technology. The numbers were silently changing. No one knew what the endpoint of this countdown was. Perhaps danger? Or maybe a different way of life? Frank couldn't be sure. He could only prepare for the worst-case scenario for now. So he had to get ready for some things before the countdown was over. If there was indeed danger approaching, he needed to at least have some ability to resist the danger within his means. Frank put on a clean gray coat, obscuring his appearance with the shadow of the hood. Taking advantage of the cover of night, he set out towards the direction of the farmer's market. In El City, the sky gets dark early in October. The sound of cooking echoes from the residential buildings, accompanied by the sizzling sound of vegetables hitting hot oil. Soon after, a tempting aroma wafted out, carrying the flavors of eggs, pork, and mutton. They entered Frank's mind like pieces of information, waiting to be retrieved when needed. It was as if he could extract a specific file from his mind when the time came. He bought pliers and a shovel from the hardware store, a bag of rice, a bag of flour, and some edible salt from the grocery store. He also purchased several boxes of antibiotics from the pharmacy. He bought batteries, a flashlight, and some compressed biscuits at the supermarket. When facing uncertainties about what lay ahead, he could only prepare as much as possible. These items nearly depleted all of Frank's savings. After returning home with the purchases, Frank entered the kitchen. He first arranged the available knives on the cutting board. He placed them all in the most convenient places around the house. The chef's knife was placed under the pillow, while the boning knife was placed on the bedside table. Countdown: 2 hours, 43 minutes, and 11 seconds. He double-checked to make sure all the doors and windows were tightly closed. So he sat on the edge of the bed and began to meditate. Do you need to find help? Who are you looking for? The mother has a new family now. The father is a gambler. Actually, it was just a few hours ago when Frank discovered the countdown appearing on his arm. He is only 17 years old. He subconsciously wanted to seek help from his parents. But then he denied the idea. Frank took out his phone and tried to take a picture of the white countdown on his arm. However, he found that the white pattern, clearly visible to the naked eye, did not appear on the phone screen. In the dimly lit room with no lights turned on and poor sound insulation due to being on the ground floor, he could often hear the footsteps of pedestrians passing by outside. The external footsteps, the breathing sounds in the house, and the faint light from the phone screen all contributed to an eerie yet tranquil atmosphere. This strange and absurd situation. It seems useless to ask an ordinary person for help. And I don't have any particularly close friends at school either. Even if I did, I shouldn't involve ordinary people in this kind of thing, right? So, if I need help, I can only think of other ways. Wait, Frank seems to have thought of something, getting up and searching the living room. 2 minutes later, he silently looked at the Guanyin Bodhisattva pendant in his hand. Then he earnestly placed it in front of him and kowtowed 9 times. The final preparation work was done. Chapter 3: The Broken World. Going to worship Bodhisattva when a crisis is imminent seems a bit like a desperate move. However, Frank feels the supernatural phenomenon on his own arm should be handed over to supernatural beings to deal with. For Frank, worshipping the Bodhisattva doesn't hurt either. He likes to do the preparation work in advance, not leaving himself any room for regrets. It was 9:30 at night. Frank sat on the bed and looked down at his phone. There was only dim light in the bedroom. There were only a few brief words sent by Nathan, his classmate, on WeChat. No one else messaged him. The profile picture of his mother, Frances, on WeChat was peaceful. This made Frank feel a trace of loss. Of course, it was just a trace. He didn't know what he was expecting. In fact, he didn't blame his mother. Father gambled and sold several properties of the family. There is also domestic violence and infidelity. Frank doesn't think there is anything wrong with his mother initiating the divorce. On the contrary, Frank once witnessed his father physically abusing his mother. He is even happy for his mother's decision, because it's the right thing to do. On the eve of their parents' divorce, Grandma once advised my mother not to divorce. How can a woman raise a teenage son alone as a single parent and still have a family in the future? Who would want to marry you? Frank listened to all this on the eve of his parents' divorce. He chose to live with his father. He remembered the bewildered expressions on his parents' faces at that moment. But Frank knew that it was also the right choice. Now, the mother has embarked on a new chapter in life. She has formed a happy new family. Frank may feel a bit lost, but he is still very carefully not to disturb. Countdown 2 hours, 31 minutes, and 12 seconds. Frank suddenly thought of a question. If this were the last 2.5 hours of his life, what should he do? This question is both serious and romantic because it asks what you want to do most in your life, but have not had the chance to do yet, or dare not do. Unexpressed love, people you want to meet but haven't seen. Places you wanted to go, but didn't go to, things you wanted to say but didn't say, are all within the scope of the answer. This question directly asks your true feelings. Frank got up and put on his coat. He actually chose to go out again when there wasn't much time left in the countdown. He pushed his broken bicycle out of the house. After he got on it, he raced towards the destination all the way. The wind on the autumn nights is slightly cool. The pedestrians on the road gradually became sparse. Frank, riding on his bicycle, had a calm expression on his face. The wind on the bridge blew the sleeves of his coat backward. He does have many regrets in his life. There are also many things he did not dare to do. But tonight, he doesn't need timidity and fear. He only needs courage. At a certain moment, Frank was thinking, if he is really going to die tonight, then he should also do the most important thing first. He is running out of time. He first went to Rose Hotel. Then he went to El City Hotel. He also went to another residential compound. But he didn't find what he was looking for there. Frank rode his bike all the way through the alley. Rushed across Killee Bridge. He arrived at a residential building. When he saw the familiar old second-hand motorcycle parked downstairs, and heard the sound of people playing mahjong on the second floor. Then he picked up his phone and called the police. "Hello, police officer. I want to report neighborhood, Building 17, Unit 2, Room 201. There are people gathering to gamble." The emergency operator on the other end of the phone seemed to pause for 2 seconds. Then they finally responded. "Okay, we will dispatch help now." Frank only relaxed at this moment. He turned around and rode his bicycle back home. Frank glanced at the white lines on his arm. Countdown 1 hour 2 minutes and 21 seconds. He began to review his preparations. Wait, was he supposed to welcome that moment at home? Frank had seen a horror movie before. The story was about the protagonist encountering something dirty. As a result, a ghost would find him every night at midnight. Then the protagonist would hide and seek, even hiding in deep mountains and forests. Yet, he was always found by the ghost. At that moment, Frank was thinking, why doesn't the protagonist go to crowded places? Even though the ghost is very powerful. But in general, people feel safer in crowded places. For example, the protagonist can go to a nightclub. When the ghost comes knocking at midnight, hundreds of people in the nightclub are shaking their heads to the booming music. It seems like the ghost should be more afraid in that scenario. So Frank starts to ponder whether he should also go to crowded places. Countdown 31 minutes and 49 seconds. In the last half hour, Frank turned on the desk lamp and quietly wrote a farewell letter left on the desk. If he died today, perhaps someday in the future, his family and friends could see the last words he wanted to say. If he didn't die, then his life might be a whole new world. The closer it got to the last moment, the calmer his emotions became. It was like a tsunami about to engulf a solitary island frozen in time. There were no undercurrents surging beneath the sea's surface, only deep contemplation and fierce courage. When the countdown reached 1 minute and 14 seconds, Frank stood up, gripping a boning knife tightly in his left hand, as if ready to face any monsters that might appear at any moment. When the countdown reached 10 seconds, Grocery's Uncle John was in the midst of moving goods, preparing to close the store and take a rest. When the countdown reached 9 seconds, the police had already taken their troublesome old man to the police station. Countdown 8 seconds, 7 seconds. Frank sat quietly on the bed, clutching the boning knife tightly in his hands. Countdown 6 seconds. A little girl lay by the window, gazing at the distance. Countdown 3 seconds. The family of 3, mother, father, and daughter, are now happily together. Countdown entering 1 second. The next moment. No ghosts. No zombies. No disasters. Frank quietly watched as the time around him stood still. He looked around and found that the desk was gone. The room was gone too, only darkness remained. Immediately after, he too was consumed by the darkness. He didn't know how long it passed. It felt like both forever and just a moment. In this moment, Frank suddenly lost his sense of time. In the darkness, the fragments of the world began to piece back together. The fragments that came from an unknown source. In an instant, they combined into a brand new world. Frank lay on a narrow, hardboard bed. This is a completely unfamiliar environment he has never been to before. He first looked at his own palm. There was nothing there. The bone knife he had been holding had long since disappeared. He looked at his arm again. He suddenly noticed that the white lines on his arm had changed. Countdown, 48 hours. 48 hours, which is 2 days, Frank pondered. The next moment, the countdown jumped 1 second. Countdown, 47 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds. Episode 4, Not Just One. Countdown 47 hours 59 minutes and 58 seconds to return. Have you traveled through time? So the end of the countdown is to travel to another timeline. And the countdown to return refers to going back in time as my own. Thinking of this, Frank breathed a sigh of relief. It's a good thing to be able to go back. although there may not necessarily be anyone missing him over there. His mother has a new life and doesn't have time to miss him. His father should be in jail, so there shouldn't be a chance to miss him. But even so, he still wants to go back and take a look. And now what he needs to do. It's just about living well in these 48 hours. So now it's the first day of the countdown. Frank began to re-examine this new world before him. The moment the world pieced itself back together, Frank saw the prison uniform on himself. He instantly realized his situation. He was in a dim, gray room. Besides an alloy door with a high-tech look, everything else was enclosed by walls. There was a small window on the 90-centimeter wide door, but it was closed. The prison cell was a single room with only a bed, covered by a thin sheet. There was also a shelf next to it. Besides a blanket, toothbrush, and towel on the shelf, it was empty. The walls of the prison cell were gray. What confused Frank was that these gray walls, when illuminated by faint light from outside, seemed to emit a metallic sheen. Metal walls? Frank sat up and absent-mindedly stroked the wall. Where would one use such a cost-ineffective building material? It is clear. This place does not belong to the world he once knew. He quickly looked down at his palm. The fingerprints on his hand were exactly the same as they used to be. Even the locations of the pores on his hand were identical. This was his own body. After traveling to this world, the bone chisel in Frank's hand was gone. His original clothes were also missing. He looked at the heavy alloy door, lost in thought. Slowly, there was a commotion outside the door. Someone even started banging loudly on the alloy door. Frank walked slowly to the door, trying to press his ear against it to listen to what was being shouted outside. He didn't get to hear clearly. The alloy door emitted a clear sound of pneumatic pressure transmission. The door opened. He looked outside. Outside the door is a winding corridor. This square prison fortress has 7 levels. Each level is filled with neatly arranged prison cells. Outside, the spacious and vast prison fortress, only sporadic lights are shining. In each open alloy door lies a dimly lit prison cell, as if containing wild beasts. Frank stands at the door, as if one step forward would lead him into an unknown journey of life within the vast prison. Suddenly, a broadcast from an unknown location starts playing. Inside is a pleasant female voice. "It's 7 o'clock in the morning. Breakfast time. All inmates please line up in order. Proceed to the dining hall for meal." The voice echoes inside the prison fortress. And Frank still looked at the threshold in front of him. It seemed that as long as he stepped out, everything would be different. In fact, he felt that he had been different from a certain moment. When did it start? Probably when he thought life was down to the last 2.5 hours. So he went ahead and did what he had always wanted to do, but had been too afraid to do before. He even reported his own father. What else is there that he dares not face? He stepped out of the prison cell. But the next moment, he froze again, only to see a narrow corridor outside. A prisoner stood in front of each prison cell door. Frank's pupils suddenly contracted. An old man hunched over, facing towards him. Only his right eye socket could be seen. It turned out to be a mechanical eye glowing with a faint red light. The entire eye socket of the other party is a mechanical structure. The metal component extends all the way to the temple on the right side. The mechanical eye does not look sophisticated. It even looks a bit rough. But I don't know why Frank is staring at him from this mechanical eye. Feeling oppressed. It seems that the other party is analyzing the details on him. It's like he's interpreting others with memory. A burly middle-aged prisoner. The right arm is completely made up of machinery. The other party is moving his fingers. Frank can still hear the other party's hand clapping. The metallic sound of mechanical parts turning. That sturdy metal arm. Like twisted steel muscles. Tough and aggressive. Throughout this entire prison fortress. Surprisingly, half of the people here possess mechanical limbs. A civilization of machinery. The word, cybernetic, popped into Frank's mind, before he could ponder further. But then he saw the burly prisoner in the neighboring cell smile at him and say, "Hey, newcomer, don't eat too much for breakfast. It'll be ugly when you throw it up." No sooner had he finished speaking. Laughter echoed down the hallway. "I heard 12 new arrivals came last night. Today we can have some fun. This kid doesn't have any cybernetic limbs at all. Looks like it's not a big deal outside either." When I hear, "newcomer," Frank was stunned. He thought the other party knew he had just crossed over from Earth. But soon he realized the newcomer should refer to him just entering the prison. The other party should not know their identity as humans on Earth. And Frank frowned, pondering the so-called entertainment from the other party. For himself, it might be a disaster. But the problem is, how can he survive among these mechanical beasts? He restrained the restlessness and fear in his heart. As an ordinary high school student facing a sudden and brutal change, the only thing Frank could do was to force himself not to show any anomalies. Because he didn't know what consequences would follow if his origin from another world was exposed. Suddenly, a teenager on the opposite fourth-floor corridor went crazy. "Where is this place? I want to go home. I don't want to stay in this kind of haunted place." "Who are you people?" "I am Henry. My dad is the chairman of L City Wild Group." "Stay away from me." "Say it." The young man started madly running along the corridor. Others did not move. They stood still as if watching a show, still maintaining the cue to go to the cafeteria for a meal. Someone looked puzzled. "Where is L City?" Frank recognized the young man at a glance. He is a freshman who is one grade below him. It seems he is not the first one. He probably won't be the last one either. Is it true that the location before the crossing is close by? Will the location after crossing also be very close? No, it cannot be confirmed yet. Suddenly, Frank heard a buzzing sound coming from above. He looked up and found a high and deep ceiling. There were countless drones flying towards the young man. "Please stop moving," a female voice from the drone warned again. "Please stop moving." Immediately after, a female voice in the prison fortress broadcasted, "All inmates, please stay in place." At the same time, below prison fortress, another gate opened, and 9 robots holding unknown firearms rushed in at full speed. The terrified young man sat down against the wall. The drones and robots surrounded him. The young man's behavior was somewhat extreme, but it helped Frank to learn a lot of information. Machine guns, drones, robots, mechanical limbs. Countless pieces of information rushed into his mind all at once. Frank stared at everything coldly. Even when far from home, meeting an acquaintance is a delight. It may not necessarily bring anything good to oneself. It could mean more trouble. Episode 5, Transcendent Status. The new person who came this time is quite interesting. "He's not a fool," said someone jokingly while watching the collapsed young man. "I heard he was sentenced to 7 years for tax evasion. He didn't cry when he was brought in yesterday. He's only crying now. These days, those who dare to provoke the tax authorities. What else but a fool?" Frank looked towards the source of the sound and saw a young man with mechanical legs. The other party saw him looking over and smiled, saying, "Hey! Are you ready, newcomer?" The surrounding crowd suddenly burst into laughter. It seemed like everyone was waiting for a show. This place is so futuristic and advanced. But it seems like the dark side of humanity hasn't changed much. Not everyone can stay calm when facing this new mechanical civilization. He just needs to make it through these first 2 days, and then go back to Earth to understand what's happening. Frank quietly watched on. For some reason, he felt even calmer at this moment. Until this moment. All the prisoners were still standing motionless. He looked around the prison fortress. The plaza downstairs was very spacious, feeling about the size of a soccer field. The open plaza was divided into several areas. The dining area, fitness and entertainment area, reading area, audiovisual area, and so on. There are no partitions between these areas. It's like a large free activity space. And around the edge of the plaza are distributed 8 large steel gates. Those gates are large, probably allowing armored vehicles to pass through directly. Suddenly, Frank was stunned. He saw that 3 people had already appeared at the dining table downstairs at the plaza without knowing when. There was a middle-aged man, who looked to be in his 40s sitting. The other 2 young men stood smiling beside him. Then, with great interest, he looked up at the prisoners upstairs. In front of the middle-aged man was a Chinese chessboard. There was a set endgame arranged on the board. The most astonishing thing is, beside the chessboard on the dining table, next to the chessboard, there was actually a cat napping with its paws tucked in, gray in color, with 2 tufts of pointed hair on its ears. It looks a bit like a lynx but not quite. A Maine Coon cat. Can you keep cats in prison? Frank was somewhat astonished. His gaze had been caught by the fellow townsman, just now. So much so that he didn't even see when the 3 men and a cat arrived at the square. Now, only the middle-aged man was utterly absorbed in the chessboard. It seemed as if what had happened upstairs had nothing to do with him. What surprised Frank the most was, even the robots in the square were acting as if the 3 figures were invisible. The seriousness and tension upstairs contrast sharply with the relaxation and calmness downstairs, like 2 different worlds. Of the 3 people, 2 young men are wearing regular blue and white prison uniforms. The middle-aged man, on the other hand, is dressed in a white martial arts uniform. In this gloomy and oppressive environment, that touch of white stands out remarkably. Frank secretly pondered, could this be the warden? No, it's not. Although the other party was wearing exercise clothes different from other prisoners, there was still a small black inmate number embroidered on the chest. This middle-aged man is also a prisoner in the prison. He is just the most special one. It is as if he felt his gaze. The young man next to the middle-aged man suddenly turned his head. He smiled and glanced back at him. Frank immediately looked away. Another broadcast sounded in Prison Fortress. Proceed to the cafeteria for meals in an orderly manner. Just as the words fell, Frank saw all the prisoners turn right. Then they lined up in a long queue. They proceeded along the stairs towards the square. Only at this point did Frank have the opportunity to count all the prisoners' numbers. Including him, there are 3,102 in total. This prison fortress has a total of 7 levels. Each level of prisoners forms a team. They are led by the prisoner at the front of the team. They orderly proceed to the cafeteria, and during this time, no one cuts in line. No one even breaks away from the line. Frank feels like everyone here is operating according to a pre-established program. Everything is constrained by someone. This orderliness. It's not until everyone finishes getting their food from the robot window that it concludes. It seems that once they get their food, they are free to move around. Frank and his group live on the 5th floor, so when it's their turn to get food, the people on the 1st floor in front have already finished dining. 2 burly prisoners were seen dragging a young man toward the farthest 1st floor prison cell from the restaurant. Many people were following and jeering on the side. Someone instructed, "Hurry and take him into the prison cell. Don't hurt him in the square. Be careful not to involve the robotic wardens." The prisoner pulling the young man carelessly responded, "Relax. I'm not a fool like Jerry." At the same time, the young man struggled fiercely and shouted, "Let me go!" But as he was about to be pulled into the prison cell, the young man's voice had turned into a plea. "Please spare me." However, no matter what he said, nobody paid attention to his pleas, only attracting even louder mocking laughter. Suddenly, the old man with mechanical eyes in front of him turned around and laughed, saying, "Stop looking around. You'll be next in a moment." Frank glanced at him calmly. The old man suddenly felt that the gaze of the young man opposite him seemed a bit different. I don't know why either. He actually felt a sudden tightness in his heart. Cooking by the window. The formation became disarrayed. Frank noticed 3 people approaching him, as if they were trying to directly control him. He quickened his pace, and they did the same, tightly surrounding him. The next moment, the scene in the prison fortress seemed to play out in Frank's mind, with 18 steel beasts on the curved roof standing silently at the ready. They were like sleeping tigers. 72 drones hung in the carved slot of the gray alloy ceiling. They were like sleeping bees. 210 surveillance cameras slowly rotate their angles. 3 robots stand armed in the square. Prisoners are picking up their meals one by one from the window. Some are complaining about the unappetizing synthetic meat again. By the water pool, someone is washing the dishes. There are also people washing dishes for others. As more and more people finish their meals on the square, it starts to get lively. Everyone shuttles back and forth, some going to the gym area, while others are watching a newcomer ceremony. However, everyone unconsciously avoids the middle-aged man staring at the chessboard. The man looked at the chessboard earnestly day by day. No one approached within 5 meters of him. It was like a calm and solid rock on the sea surface. All the surging seawater and boats had to give way. Frank suddenly picked up a tray and accelerated through the circle of 3 guards before they noticed. He walked towards the middle-aged man, looking in his direction. Many people suddenly realized what the newcomer intended to do. Gradually, more and more people turned their gaze towards him. And they whispered and exchanged glances, observing the expressions on the faces of the prisoners, as if they were waiting to see him make a fool of himself. Many of the middle-aged men found the newcomer in prison to be unusual. There were also many new prisoners who wanted to rely on each other to get out of trouble. Frank was never the only one. But in fact, everyone failed. It's just that. Frank turned a deaf ear to those mocking voices. He continued to hold the tray as if no one else was around, weaving through the crowd. He hasn't even gotten close yet. He was then stopped by the young man next to the middle-aged man. The other person smiled and said, "New here. I know what you're up to. But we won't help you." The other person guessed Frank's thoughts accurately. Frank then shifted his gaze to the young man behind him. The middle-aged man beside him seemed completely oblivious to everything happening around him, as if he hadn't heard a thing. He looked earnestly at the middle-aged man and said, "Forward soldier moves 1 step. I can solve this endgame." The middle-aged man did not lift his head until now. Then the square suddenly fell silent. The cat also opened its eyes. Episode 6. Pawn.